A streak of purple ink that refused to dry dragged the whole noon toward the porch. I saw a wind chime sway out of rhythm, a man unloading bullets in broad daylight, a girl turning the chipped side of a cup, from the payroll sheet pinned to the church door to the ring of water covering a letter. The story kept me there until silence spoke. That noon the wind whipped dust sideways along the tin roof of the general store. The metal shook like someone grinding their teeth. I sat on a wooden step, back against the salt barrel, the smell of horse sweat hanging in the air like an invisible white streak. Beneath a rusted hook near the post, a rag hung loose, a purple ink stain spreading across it. A strange purple, not quite dark, not quite dry. As if someone had pressed in a thumb wet with ink, then thought better of it, and pulled back halfway. The wind jerked, and the rag touched the post, leaving a faint smudge on the wood. I watched and felt my spine prickle. Purple ink was rare out here, only used when tied to papers that bound a person. A stubborn ink, stubborn like the promise of the one who held it. Across the street, the wind chime, made of spent shells, swung out of time. Not the even pull of a breeze, more like someone yanking a string from afar. Each casing was pitted, brass glinting under the sun. One was shorter than the rest, mouth bent, hanging crooked. Children hid behind the trough. The older one pulled the younger away when the chime rattled 3 quick beats. The storekeeper heard it, kept weighing sugar, never lifting her head. The girl came from the open yard behind the stables. Dust clung to her skirt like dry flour on knees. Mara, her chin too low, as if to hide her neck. She slipped under the awning, right beneath the rag. Her thumb was ink-stained. The purple had sunk into the ridges of her print, round like the seal left on paper, now held as a memory on skin. She didn't hide her hand, didn't offer it either, left it there. Still like someone just off a long road, knowing she hadn't arrived yet. By the post, Abel Hart leaned his shoulder, tall and thin, his back drawn in slightly, as if a string were tied at his nape and pulled down over the years. The smell of saddle oil clung to his hands, so strong it cut through dust, iron, old leather, hat pulled low, brim frayed. The cuff of his brown shirt bore a dark oil patch, worn into the place he always wiped his knife blade. He looked at the street, not at her. His left pale, like time moving slow until tired. Mara looked at the cup like a door she didn't know how to open. Hair stuck to her temple, her forehead slick with sweat, but no tears. She used the unstained hand to touch the handle. Her little finger shook. I heard porcelain click against her knuckle, fine like small stones knocking in a dry riverbed. At the roadside, the shell chime rattled again. 3 off-beat notes, then still. The whole row of porches heard, but no one spoke. The wind shifted, blowing dust back in our faces. I licked my lips, tasted iron. My eyes slid left to where a man had been standing who knew how long. Cordell's handler. Black stubble rough on his face. A knife tucked at his belt's back. Thin gray vest missing the last button. He held a stack of papers, inside a stiff cover. The top edge showed the first sheet, marked with a purple circle the size of a fingertip. He tapped the butt of his pen into his palm, steady enough to unnerve. No one asked. No one introduced anyone. The way he stood was the way a tree's shadow stood, neither asking to be used nor offering itself. Only the sound of pen against flesh. Again and again. The more I heard it, the more I wanted to cover my ears. Mara lifted the cup. The chip faced away. I noticed, couldn't tell if she had turned it or if Abel had placed it so. She brought it to her lips, didn't sip right away. Lips touched porcelain, paused, drew back. Tried again. This time, a small swallow. The new ring of water from the cup's base printed over the old, offset by a fraction. I saw that shift and knew I was looking at something more important than the water. Wind caught the rag again. The purple stain kept bleeding outward into a hazy edge. Odd how the ink in cloth acted like water on a leaf, slipping into the fibers, then halting at some invisible threshold. Each gust made it touch the post, leaving another mark. Now the porch beam had 3 purple stains, one fresh, one old, one in between. She spoke low, lips not fully parting, breath hissing. Please. One came in to buy. The oil lamp inside had been out since morning, but the smell lingered in the air. The dog, lying under the table beside my feet, yawned, teeth yellow, tongue dry. Mara set the cup down. The rim touched the counter, soft, like someone knocking a noose against a bowl. She placed it with the unstained hand. The other clutched her skirt, the ink marking the cloth in a half circle. She noticed, tried to rub it off. It stayed. Purple stayed stubborn. I saw the red groove at her wrist. Not from today. Abel pulled a clean folded handkerchief from his shirt pocket, set it on the step, not handing it over. Left it there. The space between the cloth and her foot was 1 step. He kept looking at the road. At its edge, the dust changed color as clouds passed over the sun. I knew the type, doing without asking for notice. Rumors about Cordell in this town, every widowed mother knew them. But rumor was only rumor. A stain on a real person's thumb was not rumor. I'd seen that ink twice before. Once, early in the rainy season, on an Apache woman holding her child, her thumb fixed purple, sitting beside the horse ring. Another time, on a blacksmith whose wife had died, deep in debt for iron. The old purple on his hand still hadn't fully faded. That purple clung like the smell of burned hide. "It's your turn to sign here," the handler said softly, his voice not needing to rise. He didn't look at her when he spoke. He looked at Abel. The butt of his pen turned toward him, like presenting a pressure that didn't require the sheriff. On the paper's edge, I saw the purple circle, fingerprints smeared in its center. Not writing. A mark. The kind taken from a person by pressing. Abel didn't move. He only shifted the toe of his boot, making a small thud on the wood, a sound like driving a very small nail into the floor. Near his foot, a beetle tried to cross a strip of sunlight. It made it 2 segments, stopped, turned back, slid under the plank. Mara's breath caught once, as if she'd swallowed dust. She lifted her inked thumb, hesitated, then lowered it. She saw the clean handkerchief near her foot. She stepped back, half a pace, bent, picked it up. Didn't wipe her hand. Just do anything that meant leaving that purple ring behind. Abel set his forefinger on the cup's handle, nudged it just enough for the new water ring to touch the old, the two almost aligned. He didn't nod, didn't shake his head. Instead, he shifted the chair back against the post, half a hand's span, so the post's shadow covered half her hand. The sun slipped 1 notch behind cloud. The shade cooled less than a degree. But I heard the change. Wind no longer cutting straight through, dust willing to settle. The handler stepped half into the shadow. His trouser cuff pressed into the wet ring from the cup. The toe of his boot darkened. He noticed, stepped back. In stepping back, the pen's butt slipped from his palm, hit the boot tip with a dry click. He bent, picked it up, brushed it off, then stood like before. The storekeeper set a peppermint at the doorway's edge, not looking at anyone. The dog stretched, moved into the shade beneath the scales platform. The chime went silent, not because the wind had died, but because someone was holding the string somewhere, keeping the shells apart. On the porch post, 3 purple stains, old and new, overlapped, like a map someone had drawn in haste, then forgotten. Her thumb still purple, the cup's good side still turned toward her, the pen still in the hand that wanted it. His ledger unopened, Abel's ledger still unseen. We sat like that, waiting for another click. No one breathed deep. If a passerby came, they'd see only a girl under the awning, a man leaning on the post, a pen holder, a chipped cup, a purple rag, a mute wind chime. But from my step, I heard something else. The ink on the rag that wouldn't dry was quietly creating a new way for the town to speak. It didn't speak loud. It just stayed. And anyone who didn't want it to stay on their hand would have to change where their hand was. Mara drew her shoulders in. Abel shifted his boot tip 1 more notch. The handler stopped tapping. The wind passed like a man without business. Somewhere a fly landed on a patch of spilled salt on the porch, rubbed its legs once, flew. I thought I heard wagon wheels far off, but maybe I imagined it. High noon makes ears mishear. The only thing certain was the purple on her thumb and the new water ring on the table. She didn't step back, didn't step forward, stood exactly where she was, like a nail just driven into the board, watching the dust agree to lie still. In this land, sometimes a cup turned to its good side is heavier than a promise, and a mark of ink that won't dry is enough to turn the course of an entire noon. The alley behind the general store was narrow as a knife blade. Broken brick, crumbling mortar, dry grass roots pushing through cracks, the smell of old trash mixed with the damp hide of horses pooling at the bend where a dented oil drum sat. Sun poured at an angle, smearing the wall with a light patch that shimmered like oil. A gray cat lay under a window ledge, one eye shut, the other half open, tail twitching slow. Mara walked 3 steps ahead, shoulders drawn. Cordell's handler followed, boots tapping evenly, pen tip touching his palm, like keeping time for the one in front. He didn't need to speak, just stayed close enough for the pen's tip to brush her nape. Each time she faltered, reminding her the purple mark was already on paper. Each touch made her tilt her head away slightly, enough for a strand of hair to slip from her ear. No one pushed, no one pulled. A small, steady pressure, the kind that used sharp things without drawing blood. I stood by the oil drum, pretending to count the nails in a wooden crate. Abel took another way around. I saw his shadow slide along the left wall, like a darker stroke of ink than the shade itself. He didn't step into the space between them, just walked parallel. At the cracked corner, he paused half a beat, as if giving her time to catch breath. Above, the windmill's blades rose past the rooftops, creaking against the flat white sky. Its tail, patched with a bent sheet of tin bearing the logo of an old beer company. The wind turned it one round, then it caught. The pump below answered with a muted gurgle. The handler lifted the pen higher, tip resting at her nape a moment longer. She angled her head like a horse dodging a fly. I heard him breathe through his nose, a sound thin as paper rubbing. The purple on her thumb darkened in the sun. He tilted the stack of papers slightly. The top sheet's edge showed a perfect purple ring. Pure message. The mark's been set. That's all. Abel didn't tell him to lower the pen. He slipped through a gap without shadows, stopped before a small concrete trough, pressed the hand pump lever fixed to the windmill. Water came up, brown-yellow, clouded for a beat, then clearing, the smell of rust pushing the alley dust back a little. From his shirt pocket, he pulled a damp cloth, short-folded, held it out in front of Mara, looking elsewhere. A gesture like someone wiping sweat and forgetting to put it away, leaving it for another to take. Rusted water into all 3 faces. He narrowed one eye, stepped back half a foot, pen lowering by an amount too slight to matter. Abel said nothing. He tilted a porcelain cup taken from the stack of chipped ones at the windowsill, dipped water straight from the pump's mouth. The cup was chipped at the rim, its green band faded, rust stains at the base the color of tea. He set it on the old wooden table against the wall, not pushing it toward anyone. Water spilled over the lip, ran down leaving a ring, darkening by degrees. I heard the drops hit the dirt floor in time with the windmill's blades. Not fast, not slow, just long enough for the undecided to decide. Mara stepped forward half a pace, lifted the cup in both hands as if it might break. The chipped side turned outward, the smooth side at her lips. She sipped very small. Her chin stayed dry. When she set it down, the second water ring overlapped the first by the width of a hair. I doubted anyone but the one sitting against the wall saw it, but the gray cat looked up at that moment, as if measuring the shift with its pupil. The handler wet his lips, switched the pen to his other hand. He raised the papers high enough for the sun to shine through, casting a faint purple circle down his forearm. He stepped in just enough for his shadow to fall across the new water ring, its edge disappearing beneath the damp toe of his boot. He glanced at his shoe for a second, then let it go. The ink on the paper was dry. It wasn't the shoe he cared about getting wet. Abel turned and walked away. No look, no sign, just half his usual pace, enough for the one behind to match. Mara followed. The cloth still covered her nose, the other hand gripping the skirt where the purple had set. The handler didn't stop them. He tilted his head back, listening to the windmill turn once more, then stood at the shadow's edge, pen tapping no longer. I stepped out from beside the oil drum, just to watch the water ring on the table fade at the edges. The way from the alley to the back lot lay bare under the sun. Grass burned yellow to the fence line. The windmill moved above our shoulders, creaking like the knees of an old man on stairs. Its tin tail rattled. The letter B printed backward on a red field, peeling off another flake. Abel stayed silent, now and then lifting a strand of Mara's hair from the barbed wire at the fence corner with 2 fingers. The damp cloth in her hand had darkened at the edge. Beyond the lot they came to the side yard behind Abel's barn. On the mottled limewash wall, a sun clock's shadow lay crooked. Its gnomon was a blunt, rusted iron strip. No one had set it since winter. Abel opened the barn door. It scraped the ground. Inside the dim, a long work table was scattered. Took the clean one. The smell of rust from the first basin was stronger, sticking in the throat like rain on tin. She drank again from the porcelain cup Abel had just refilled. The third water ring printed on the table, offset toward the light coming through the wall slats, fading as a cloud's shadow passed. I counted 3 rings, none matching. The gaps between them like 3 breaths of different lengths. Abel untied the cord holding the window, let the wind in. Dust from the path blew in once, then out the roof vent. He lifted the oil lamp from the corner, checked the fuel, set it down, didn't light it, didn't need to. By afternoon, the porch post's shadow reached deep inside the house. Abel's doorway darkened like a cave mouth. A wall spigot hissed thin, dripping tea-colored water, leaving a green trail at the base. A bar of homemade soap, corner softened by damp, bore the cut marks of a knife. Abel pointed to the spigot. Mara set her hands under the stream, rubbed. The purple bled into a thin haze, drifting with the water, catching under her nails like moss. Abel placed a small, stiff bristle brush with a wooden handle in her open palm. Didn't touch her hand, just let it drop lightly into it. Mara bowed her head, scrubbed. Each stroke made a faint, blunt sound. Her skin reddened at the joints. The stain faded in the pads of her fingers, but clung in the deeper grooves. She switched hands, scrubbing the inked one with the clean. Breath shortening with the sting, no complaint. Abel set down a small jar with a faded label, homemade salve of pine oil and marrow fat. Unscrewed the lid, left it. No motion to apply. Mara looked up, touched a little, rubbed it into the scraped skin. The smell of resin was warmer than iron, pressing the rust scent down. The spigot still dripped, its rhythm like a sewing needle. Abel opened the long drawer under the table, took out an old leather-bound payroll book, the cover cracked, edges frayed like sun-dried moss. A bit of hemp cord was still pinned to one corner. He set the book on the small shelf by the window, opened to a page with faint columns. Took a stub of pencil, shaved it once on the table's edge, the smell of wood quick. Wrote, Mara, hand, below it, advance $1, salve 25 cents. The date in even, flat numbers. He propped the book on his knee, angled it so the light was enough to read. Didn't ask her to sign, didn't ask her name. Closed the book, set it on the high shelf, leather facing out. In the corner, hem. She folded it in 4, set it in the basin, squared its edge to the rim, as if setting straight what could be set straight. Abel stood in the doorway, shoulder to the post, head tilted as if listening to wind. No praise. No done. Outside, the sun shifted. Evening shadow climbed the first step. The door was still unlatched. The bolt hung loose, round as a dry kernel of corn, swinging with the wind, never stopping at a catch. No click to ease anyone's mind. I sat on the porch step, listening to the town turn from glare white to a dull yellow. Across the street, the shell chime rattled a short run, clink, clink, then stilled, not the play of wind. The beat was a hand touching the string and pulling away. Mara's eyes fixed that way, unblinking. Her ear took the silence behind the metal sound, like someone counting the space between 2 heartbeats. Far out in the lot, hoofbeats began to draw a thin, steady line of sound. Not fast, not slow. Just enough for anyone used to measuring distance by dust to know someone was coming, but not yet here. The wind eased its heat, and the smell of old straw rose to replace iron. Sparrows shifted trees. The windmill's tail shadow cut across the wall for the umpteenth time. No one counting. Mara stood just outside the porch, not stepping in. Feet slightly together, the tip of her boot scuffed a faint mark in the dust, as if sketching herself a temporary boundary. Her hands were dry. The stain faded, but the mark in the nail bed stayed, enough to remind. Abel shifted his stance so his shadow covered half her shoulder, without touching. Her shoulders sank by a notch. The door stayed open just enough for wind to pass through. On the table inside the barn, 3 overlapping water rings still hadn't fully dried. The old payroll book sat quiet on the shelf, its cracked leather cover like the skin of a plowman's hands. The dripping spigot counted time for anyone patient enough to count. A wind chime somewhere clicked once, like a sneeze. Then silence. We stayed in that stillness a while longer. No one asked for anything. The paper was still somewhere out in the alley. The ink on her finger had learned its way to stay. The water rings had chosen which to match and which to miss. The open door meant no ending yet, and the far-off hoofbeats were bringing exactly the unease this afternoon required. That was all. We left those clinging at the bit. Cordell was not in front. He kept his gloved hand loose on the reins and walked half a horse length behind, like a man used to letting others take the dust first. The same handler from the alley still carried the papers in their stiff cover, pen butt sticking from the edge like a thorn. The third man was likely new, broad-shouldered, his spurs silent. He moved on soft heels like a cat. Abel stood at the threshold, hands empty. The rifle hung deep inside, only half the stock showing in the dark, beyond the nail where the hat hung. He set his boot tip on the dust-lined border, didn't lift it, just turned it half around, cutting a new crescent into the wood. His shadow reached to the porch post's base, covering the faint old water ring and the table by the door. I heard the creak of leather as the lead horse turned its head. The handlers stood at the shadow's edge. The pen's butt tapped his palm once. The wind touched the papers, the top sheet's edge showing a purple circle as round as a coin dipped in ink and set down. He jerked his chin. Cordell raised his eyes under the hat brim, looking at Abel's shadow, not his face. "Your paper is signed with pressed ink," Abel said. Flat voice, no extra words. The word ink dropped onto the porch, heavy as a stone on a barrel lid. For a moment, no one spoke. The wind shifted. Yard dust surged in, then drew back. The chime knocked 2 shells. Plink, plink, then stopped. The dog inside gave a low throat sound, not enough for a bark. The new man moved his foot, the boot's edge touching the step as if testing the wood's firmness. Cordell lifted his chin. The sun stamped a red patch on his throat where the shirt buttons were left open. "I have paper," he said, short. By his arm, the old glove showed a fresh scuff line. The handler raised the cover an inch, as if to show the porch the purple mark. Abel didn't look at the paper. He only tipped his shoulder enough to see inside. On the wall, the wooden rifle peg. Below it, the unlit oil lamp. Beside that, the porcelain cup tilted on the table, chipped side outward. Inside the cup, a thin film of water clung to the glaze, sliding slow as a slug. I heard a small crack from somewhere, maybe the porch wood swelling in the heat. The handler brought the pen's butt forward, stopping at the shadow line, not putting even half a toe onto the porch. He breathed through his nose. The vein at his temple pulsed once. Mara stood inside, a single step away. The porcelain cup was in her right hand, the chipped side already turned toward Abel earlier, like a small shield unspoken. Again. The new man shifted half aside, as if to give room for his shoulder to swing. The round nails in his boot toe caught a flicker of sun, then went dull. His spurs made no sound. His eyes swept the house like counting, rifle peg, oil lamp, window, post. He swallowed once. The artery in his neck beat plain. I looked at the dust line on the step, the crescent Abel had made moments ago, the dust inside, cleaner than out by a shade. Enough for a sharp eye to see. Cordell saw it too. He set his heel just beyond the line, toe inching like a dog testing cold water. Mara lifted the cup a fraction, then set it down. The chipped side turned a notch, no scrape sounding on the wood. Her finger met the cool glaze, paused like touching the skin of someone asleep. She pulled back, set the cup in its new place, chipped side toward Abel. I saw the motion, slow, small, as if someone had shifted a thorn, so, if touched, the other would take it first. Behind her, the door eased shut with a hinge breath as the wind changed. The tight moment fit there, wordless, soundless. Cordell's chin twitched a fraction, like a man swallowing sand. His eyes moved over cup, table edge, Abel's hand, then stopped at the threshold. I saw his throat work. The handler waited for a signal, pen butt still. The new man leaned back half an inch, lowered his weight, ready. No one dared make a boot toe into a witness. Abel shifted his shoulders slightly, enough for his shadow to fall over Mara's cup hand. No touch. No pull. Just enough to take the sun's heat off her skin. The chime tapped one shell, like reconsidering. Cordell stepped back on his heel first, very slow. His shadow slid off the porch line, out into sunlit dirt, thinning by a degree. His eyes stayed on Abel's shadow, like holding the reins of a big horse. The handler followed, the paper cover dipping an inch, the purple circle on its edge, tilting. The new man dropped his crouch, straightened his heels, spurs brushing together with the faintest sound. The turn happened with no apology, no shout, only the dust changing its course. I let out a breath without knowing when I'd been holding it. The door behind Mara pressed into its frame, another fraction, the sound of the wood soft as a hand stroking a horse's back. The porcelain cup stayed where it was, the chipped rim still turned toward Abel. The water ring beneath it spread a thin halo as damp dust bled outward, imperfectly round. Cordell turned his face to the handler. His eyes cooled half a degree. The cup bowl in a kitchen. Abel didn't follow with his eyes. He stayed where he was, watching the dust. It no longer struck the porch post, now it passed across, breaking apart on its own into falling grains. The wind softened. His shirt clung to the bone of his shoulder under the cloth. His chest lifted barely. His chin stopped at the same angle as before. Inside, the dog shifted places. One claw tapped the board, then silence. The rifle hook stayed where it was, half the stock still in shadow, like a fish under water. The oil lamp remained unlit, its wick marked dark. The floor beneath me felt warmer, or maybe it was the blood coming back. Cordell pressed his leg to the horse's side, turned its head away. The handler stepped half a horse ahead. Pen slipped into the vest pocket, papers tucked under the cover. The new man came last, his eyes still marking objects in the house, like committing a map to memory by pacing it. The three went straight for the road, dust clinging to their heels before falling away like chaff. I saw the nail drop from his heel from that earlier bend. No one had picked it up. It lay there, rolled half a turn, stopped in the floorboard gap. The shell chime dropped one single note, tossing a glint of brass across the porch ceiling before going dead. The gray cat in the back lot jumped down from the sill without a sound. The purple stain in Mara's nail bed didn't vanish in the wind, only dimmed under Abel's shadow. The porcelain cup tilted a degree from the floor's give, but didn't slide. We stood there a while longer, without anyone saying so. The light shifted slightly, new shadow laying over the old, dark as a decided ink line on the second page of an unopened ledger. Outside, dust settled, starting the prelude to quiet. Inside, the breathing of three creatures, man, woman, dog, moved in the same measure. No, safe now. No soothing touch. Only the porch step boundary, held exactly where it had been. Abel jerked his boot toe, shook a stripe of dust from the leather. He didn't step inside right away. His eyes stayed on the road dust, like a man waiting for the last grain to fall into its place. Mara cradled the cup in both hands, set it further in. The chipped side still turned to him. The door behind her touched its frame again, light, like someone nodding. And the silence after was thick enough to rise without breaking it. That night, the oil stove breathed like an old man. The flame wavered, the shadows of two people breaking and joining on the plank wall. Posture, sitting level, his hand under hers, letting her press down if it hurt too much. On the table lay a smooth leather thong he'd taken from the hook, one end already looped in a small Honda knot. Abel didn't explain. He worked slow, feeding the cord, turning his wrist, making the loop's eye open and close in his palm. He let it go, left it between them. Mara touched it, copied the motion, fumbled at the step where the tail had to return to the standing end, the line twisting. Abel didn't correct her. He tapped the tabletop twice with a fingernail at the right spot, marking her path. The third time, the knot came true, Her eyes didn't smile, but her shoulders sank a notch. On the stove, the meat soup rose to the rim, steam thick with onion and black pepper. The big tin spoon tapped the pot 3 times, clack, 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 then stilled. I sat on the porch step, hearing those 3 taps carry through the wood, then swallowed by night. The dog shifted again, huffed in its throat, didn't bark. The shell chime outside stayed still. The night was dry. Abel pulled the old payroll book from the shelf, opened to the faint pencil-marked page, laid a flat board under it. He added a short line, bandage 10 cents, placed a small, imperfect dot. There was a purple streak on the edge of his forefinger, likely from the ink rag someone had left on the counter earlier. He didn't wipe it, let it sit, drying. When I looked, it seemed like the mark of something decided not to be washed out in a night. Inside, the oil lamp ticked against the wall like a man counting coins. Abel switched the bad chair to his side, pushed the sturdy one toward Mara with his boot toe. She sat a half-hand deeper, her shoes no longer rocking. Soup ladled out, steam drifting. No, eat. Just a small nod. The tin spoon touched the bowl's glaze 4 times, then less often. The flame lowered. The night wrapped the house like an old quilt.
Morning peeled the frost from dead grass. The day's cold sun cut the smell of horse. The town church's pine door was studded with nails the size of thumbs. Abel wore his old brown shirt, payroll book in his left arm, small hammer in his right. No one walked with him except the sound of his boots on dirt, steady as a metronome. I followed 2 buildings back only to see he tacked the book to the church door by 2 nails through the cover's top corners, didn't open to the middle, opened to the name and pay column, Mara, hand. Below, advance $1, salve, 25 cents, bandage, 10 cents.
Thursday, exactly. The early churchgoers read without speaking. One woman pulled her curious boy back, her head dipped slightly, like amen. That was the morning's cold twist. No brawl, no blade. Just a ledger hung before God, her name moved from invisible to standing level with wages and medicine. From now on, touching her in front of this door was touching already paid wages. No need for town talk. The water ring announced it well enough. Abel took the cup back, set it on the stone step, didn't wipe the ring. His finger still bore its purple edge. He looked at no one, turned toward the ranch. The hammer went into his pocket without a sound. By mid-afternoon, the sun had hardened into nails. The hot dust stood still, like smoke hung in place. The shell chime on the roof rang harder than the wind's brakes should allow. I looked up and saw someone had tied an extra line, a thin, clear fishing cord, tacky with fresh pine resin, from the roof's shadow down to a knot near the shell cluster. Each small tug from some hand out in the cottonwoods sent the chime into a dense rush like an alarm. Cordell's lot came again. Fewer words than the day before. The new man walked in front, eyes locked on the door as if aiming. The handler held the paperboard low, pen hidden. Cordell wore a different shirt, cleaner, collar fastened shut. No smile. The dust on the road didn't kick in columns, just rolled sideways at the porch step, breathing hard. Abel stood as before, same porch threshold, but with one new thing, the payroll book in his hand. Its cracked leather cover was scored with black marks, a bit of hemp cord still pinned to one corner. The purple on his finger was darker than in the morning, as if rubbed fresh, maybe when he'd pressed the book to the church door. They came to the line and stopped. The shell chime jerked 3 times in a row, long as a snapping brake cable. Mara stood inside, one hand knotting fabric around her wrist in the style she'd learned the night before. Not loose, not tight. Her eyes moved across the table, looking for the porcelain cup. It sat tilted. The chipped side was turned toward Abel. Her breathing was steady, not fast. Abel pulled the rifle from its hook, never raising the muzzle to eye level. He flipped the cylinder open, took each bullet out, and set them evenly on the table in front of them. Lead touching dry wood, cool. He closed the cylinder, set the gun down with an open palm. "Not shooting," he said, eyes still on the line. "But step onto the porch, and I keep the horse." The new man smiled just enough to lift half a fingernail's worth of lip. He stepped. He saw the ground an inch closer too late, hand flailing for something to grab. The table's edge met his knuckles with a hollow knock. In the same breath, the handler lifted the cover. Cordell pulled his horse's reins to step up and block. Abel shifted half a shoulder, his free hand catching the new man's wrist, turning it into the loop's pole, using the fall to lock him down. No punch, no kick, only the rope tightening on skin and the breathless sound of someone losing their balance. The shell chime gave a drawn-out whine as the clear cord was yanked too hard and snapped. 2 shells slipped off, dropped clattering onto the table's edge, rolled to where one of Abel's bullets lay, struck with a thin, cold ting. Cordell stepped fully back, pulling his horse sideways, his boots skidding in the dust but never crossing in. The handler went to his pocket, not for the pen but for a handkerchief, and dabbed the sweat at his throat. His eyes went to the table edge, to the bullet lying beside the empty shells, and I saw something settle in him as if reading a chart. Live round to kill, spent shell to rattle. Today both sat on the table, and neither had been used by reflex. Abel turned the knot half around tighter on the man's wrist, pinning his shoulder to the ground. His knee pressed the shoulder blade in exactly the right spot. No break, just stillness. His breathing stayed even. His eyes moved slow from the horse's hoof to Cordell's chin, and stopped at the porch line. The threshold remained intact. No extra blow, no boot to the gut. I saw Abel's hand open just enough to keep the man's forehead from hitting the stone edge, a move not made for show. Then he eased the knot only enough for the man to breathe, not escape. Cordell's mouth opened once, no sound. Closed again, leaving a thin line of foam. He lifted both hands in front of him like someone measuring the air. The handler nodded to nothing and stepped back. When released, the new man backed too fast, heel hitting the table leg. The bullet rolled and stopped in the half-dry ring from the afternoon. The circle cradled half the round like a trough. They left without turning their heads. No spur jingle. The horse pivoted crosswise, lifting its heels soft. The shell chime, now without its extra cord, stayed still. The 2 fallen shells lay beside the loaded round like 3 unsent ellipses. Mara stepped forward, not touching Abel. She picked up the loaded bullet, set it farther from the edge, left the shells in the middle. That small switch of order stood in for a sentence. Abel straightened, brushed dust from his knee, turned his head toward the hanging rope. He untied the knot, hung it higher by a hand's width, so a short man, encircling the bullet like a face without eyes. The purple on Abel's finger wasn't fully dry, lighter than at noon. The wind brought straw scent inside, pressing the pine oil smell down near the floor. The oil stove inside no longer breathed heavy, its flame lowered to a bead, still there, like a door guard. Out on the road, the dust behind them took a long stretch to settle. The hoofbeats left the ears slower than their figures left the eye. We left the objects in place. 2 empty shells, 1 live round. Payroll book, lead rope, porcelain cup. No one touched the arrangement. It was a map of the afternoon's outcome, so clear it needed no reading. And at its center, the porch line, thin as a hair, still unstepped. The morning at the county office had no bell. Only sun-swollen boards, nails breathing under the floor, and the smell of old ink. The door was half open, its hinge rasping like someone swallowing a seed whole. On the counter, Cordell's filing lay spread, the edges curled like a worn knife spine. A water ring from a chipped porcelain cup lay across the purple mark in the upper left corner, bleeding out into a pale halo. The clerk was a small man with fingernails just long enough to tap paper without tearing it. He tapped twice on the wet mark, the tone deeper than the dry edge, then stopped. His eyes went neither to Abel nor to me, only to the ring. Then he slid the wall calendar back to today's date, the number printed a shade darker than yesterday's from the sun. Inside, the black ceiling fan ran at its slowest, its blades sweeping dust in a counted circle. Abel stood a step from the counter, hat tucked under his arm, the old payroll book set with its cover facing out, the hemp cord still pinned at the corner. The purple on his forefinger had dried into a dull rim, no sheen, like the edge of something already done. He didn't set the book on the filing. He leaned it against the wood rail beside the counter, its edge not touching the water ring. The cup on the counter was chipped at one side, its green band worn where too many mouths had rested. Inside, the water was split into 3 slices of light, trembling slightly under the fan's rhythm. The clerk lifted the cup, sniffed, as if testing liquor, then set it back exactly, its base sealing the ring, covering what purple still showed. He wiped a fingertip on the rag near the ink pad, didn't get it all. The purple shifted from paper to skin, then stayed. On the counter, an old law book lay open-backed, its spine cracked, stitching like reed roots. The clerk slid a leather-covered fingertip into the edge, turned to the L section worn thin. He stopped where wages met contracts. I couldn't read the words, only saw that the paper there was darker. Review stack. That pile was as tall as a hand, edges uneven. The clerk placed a small green slip on the corner, pressed it under the clip. No writing. He nodded once to the air, as if calling roll. The fan groaned through another turn, blade shadows crossing his face for an instant before the color returned. Abel didn't ask when. He stepped back half a pace, put on his hat, closed the book with its cover out, walked to the door. His boot met the frayed mat with so little dust shaken you couldn't see it. The door closed behind him without a sound, letting a narrow strip of light fall across the counter, resting on the half-dry ring. The clerk laid his hand on the law book's cover, not reading on. He listened to the silence like a man hearing the stopped tick of a clock somewhere on the wall. That noon, the back lot of the ranch was yellow enough to scrape the eyes. Mara sat close to the step, legs parallel, dust marking her trousers in a darker band. Before her, yesterday's rope lay coiled on the ground. She rolled it, the Honda knot resting in her palm like a seed. The purple on her thumb was faint now, a fine trace in the nail bed, flashing once when sun slipped past a leaf. On the table, the whetstone lay lengthwise. Abel's wooden-handled knife kissed it at the right angle, rasping a long pull. Mara didn't ask how. She set the blade in the same groove, drew it even, the pace of someone careful not to cut herself. The sound was dry, the smell of metal sitting under straw. Each time she stopped, she set the knife on the table's edge, blade out, handle in, as if learning the order of safety. The last of the ink in her nail was a thin strand, stubborn in 2 deep grooves. She took a thin shaving from a scrap in the shed, whittled one end to a point, and picked at the grooves. Wood dust rose, sap scent pushing the ink smell down. She shifted her hand in the light like a silversmith checking a seam. No complaint. No enough. Just one more pick, and the mark dulled like a bruise overnight. Abel changed chairs. The old short-legged one had a wedge, but it still rocked if you leaned wrong. He brought the solid chair from inside, set it by the wall where the wind was less, turned it toward the table, shaved a new wedge thinner than a fingernail, slid it under the weak leg. The chair stood firm. He touched it with his boot, nudged it toward Mara. No sit. No smile. She eased into it, her shoulders dropping a notch like setting down a small sack. On the line, 2 white cloths snapped, their hems dripping round beads into the dirt, vanishing at what of someone who'd seen it before. She drew the knife one last time along the stone, the sound smoother now, then wiped the blade on an old cloth. The cut of steel left a slim shine. Her eyes stayed there a beat, like on her name in a ledger. I sat in the pump's shade, listening to the water shift one notch in the pipe when the wind turned. No one retold yesterday, no one redefined this morning. The solid chair sat like a promise written in wood. The rope lay true, not in place, knife at its right angle. The things that could be mended were mended. The marks that hadn't faded waited for more sun. Evening came by taking sound away instead of adding shadow. Wind shut off like a knob turned. Leaves stopped flipping. Dust lay low on the road, not lifting into a screen. The shell chime was still. The extra cord tied days ago had been cut, its stub knot left in the main line. No more wine. From the roof, the brass light no longer danced. The cluster stood like dots against the sky. Inside, the lamp was still unlit. The window was open 2 notches. The rush mat dropped halfway. The table still held the old ring, a new one pressed over it but not closed, like 2 nickels off-center. Yesterday's bullet was gone. The 2 empty shells lay in a wooden box with bent nails, no separate space. The payroll book stood upright on the shelf, spine out, leather scent faint. Mara stepped to the porch, raised her hand to her eyes, not to shade them, but to measure the space between 2 posts as she had learned. Her thumb lifted, the purple now only a faint shadow in the nail bed, bruise-colored after 2 nights. She turned her palm in the light, watching to be sure it didn't darken again. A small breath out shifted a speck of dust from the post's face. Abel came around from the barn, carrying the smell of straw and horse sweat gone dry. He stopped at the wind chime's hook, touched the knot, checked the cut end, didn't retie it. His hand left the cord, touched the rim of the cup on the table, turned the good side out. The cup was empty. The rust in its base showed like a small constellation. He pushed it in an inch, no new ring printed. The sound of corn popping somewhere past the neighbor's stove was eaten by wind before it reached here. A bird called once, moved branches. The dog shifted, muzzle on its paws, eyes fully shut. The road beyond the ranch had no rising dust. Old wheel marks blurred as shadow crossed. Mara sat on the step, rubbing one palm with the other's fingertips, testing the drop. Said the last word, without speech. The sun bent off, the sky settling into earth tones. The porch post's shadow shortened, not reaching the step line. The chime stayed silent. The purple on Mara's thumb was as faint as an old bruise, the kind only seen up close, the kind no one need explain. I stayed a while, listening to the boards cool, losing count, and just enough to know, tonight, the house wouldn't need a lamp. The quiet was bright enough. By now the story had settled like a porch after wind. The purple mark had faded, the table's water rings lying snug over noisy words, the chime still because its extra cord was gone. The sturdy chair had found its place, every object was back where it belonged, and sometimes that alone is enough to keep a person upright. Here, people heal by small acts, turning the cup's chip toward themselves, tightening a Honda knot to fit the hand, hanging a payroll book where all can see it. No grand speech, only a porch line kept, and the hand knowing when to stop. If one detail stays with you, the water ring, the rope, the chime, or the faded ink, tell it back in a short sentence. Sometimes, the thing you remember most will speak the moral you never got to name. Here, the silence carries far enough.